Hello and welcome again. This is Wednesday, and this is that time that we delve into our new series where we hear from social entrepreneurs and their teams from around the world about timely topics and solutions. And my name is Josephine Nzerem. I work at Ashoka. Today is really something special because this conversation will be part of an insight series on what's next for gender equity, supported by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And we are thrilled to have many of you today from Ashoka Global Community. And also, I'm welcoming those of you joining us from FLONE Initiative. We are super excited to have you here. And guess what? Today, for the next 30 minutes, we are going to be hearing from Naomi Mwaura. But before you get to know who Naomi is, I'd like to give you a few tips. So just a reminder, we love hearing from you. And as we move along, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll get back to you by the second half. So that's it. All right, so today I'm introducing you to Naomi. Naomi has created a professional and inclusive public transport industry, thereby making the public transport safe and efficient. So we're about to hear what she did and how she did it. So Naomi, welcome. We are super excited to have you here. Thank you for coming. So my first question to you, Naomi, is what brought you into the transport industry in Kenya?
Thank you, Josephine, and hi, everybody. Hi, Happy New Year, and maybe I can throw in Happy Valentine's too in there. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. I'm really excited. Please feel free to write in your questions and answer. Happy to answer any question you might have. And Josephine, thank you for that question. So what brought me to public transport? I can't say there was a particular experience that led me to public transport. I think it was an accumulation of several experiences over the course of about 3 to 5 years. First of all, I grew up in a family that ran a public transport vehicle in my local hometown. And if you've been to Kenya, public transport vehicle tends to be very colorfully painted. And at that time, I was about probably in high school, and my family, my extended family, decided to invest in a public transport vehicle, and they colorfully painted it. And it was the hottest public transport vehicle in our area at that time. And so we became quite popular in our local area. And I think that popularity kind of made me start loving public transport. And in addition, as I mentioned, it was a family business, and I grew up watching my family members work as public transport operators. And that gave me an appreciation of public transport and its ability to create employment, not just for one family, but for a whole extended family, and also provide the freedom of mobility. And as I mentioned, this was in high school. When I went to university, unfortunately, I had an awful experience in public transport where I was assaulted in a bus park. And this led me to start really experiencing and thinking about public transport as a whole in Kenya. And then about 2 years later, I saw an incident. It was a video circulating online. It was a viral video of a woman who was physically assaulted in a bus park. And that video was a really awful video, but it also made me think that what I had thought would happen to me when I got assaulted was even worse than what I had imagined. And my girlfriends and I in university started talking about our issues with public transport. And when this video came out, we tried to start a protest. And we ended up 4 of us showing up to that protest. And because it was a very small town, we were 4, and and we ended up with more media than people who had come to the protest. And one of my friends who's a lawyer had this amazing idea of having a press conference. And so we turned the protest into a press conference. And after we came back to university, we decided to form now, which is now this organization, FLONE Initiative Trust. But as I mentioned, that it wasn't one particular incident, it was a couple of things that kept happening. And before long, this turned out to be my passion and something I've worked in since university.
Yeah, thanks so much, Naomi. Wow. From experience of assault, your own story, and then the friend that the woman that the video went viral, and then going also back to childhood engagement with transport. Now, looking back, what would you say has changed with your work? How has the operation of matatu drivers and other players in the industry changed as a result of your work? And please, could you explain to us what matatu drivers are in Kenya so that people understand what it is?
Yes, so in Kenya, public transport is actually private owned. So it's an individual or a group of people who buy a public transport vehicle. It can be a 14-seater or a 33-seater and have it on the road. There are a couple of licenses you can acquire in order to be able to operate a public transport vehicle. But what that means is that it's not government controlled, it's not government run. And so you would have about, on one particular route, you could have about 1,000 public transport owners. And in a public transport vehicle, there's usually the driver, there's the conductor, the person who gets people into the vehicle and collects the bus fare. There's also somebody called Kamagera. So this is a person who calls you into the public transport vehicle. And sometimes they'll even sit in a public transport vehicle in order to give it the illusion that it's about to get full. These people are all informally paid in the industry. So we say approximately one public transport vehicle supports about 4 people. And that is all that is still informal. There's no contract. There's no minimum wage. But it is very crucial because looking at Kenya's unemployment rate, we are about 60% of the population is under 35. We have a very high high youth unemployment rate. But you find public transport is the one place where as a youth you can go without having to dress up, without having to speak proper English, as we say in Kenya, speak a lot of English, go for interview and still manage to go home with about $5, even for just calling people into a public transport vehicle. So when we started, as I mentioned, we started with my girlfriends. One of the things we struggled with was a lack of data. We had lived experiences of using public transport that were negative, but we could not find data to back our lived experiences. So, and that is why the foundation of what we do is knowledge generation. So we do a lot of research. And what we do after we get the research, it's action-oriented research. So we implement the research recommendations. And so what has changed is that there is greater conversation on the importance of gender and mobility. But also there's been a lot more interest in looking at the travel needs, not just for women, but also other vulnerable groups. So for example, FLONE, we've started working on generating data on disability and public transport. We've also started, we also launched another research looking at the elderly, the access of public transport among the elderly. But we are not the only organization. When we first started out, we were the only organizations, but we are now even seeing more research, more researchers and academic institutions looking at these gender gaps in mobility.
Yeah, so would you say that you influenced that?
I think so, but most importantly, I think for us, the tipping point of our work was when we organized a protest It was called My Dress, My Choice. You can still find it on Twitter. Just look at hashtag My Dress, My Choice, which was a protest against the harassment and sexual violence against women in public transport. And that really created a national-wide awareness about the issue. It was unfortunate because the protest was as a result of 3 viral videos of women being assaulted and having their dress stripped off at bus terminus. And it was the first time that I had so many calls where people would say, okay, now we see what you've been talking about. We didn't know it was this bad. But My Dress, My Choice led to some legal reforms. So for example, now stripping women off their clothes, which was an offense that was unique to the Kenyan public transport, is now punishable of up to 10 years.
Great.
That was not there before. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. I love the fact that you saw the use of data and what is important, and then the way you have pushed for the research that has happened even in institutions. Now, looking at the Kenya experience, are there lessons to be learned from this to other countries?
Yes, and we are lucky enough to have spearheaded some of these replications of our model. So for example, with the support of Frederick Albert Foundation, we've supported ATIGU, which is Amalgamated Public Transport Union in Uganda, to form a women's committee in their labor union. So we worked very closely with ATIGU, which, as I mentioned, is a labor union, and we helped them establish a women committee. So we helped them establish a strategy and a calendar of events. That was in 2019, and I'm happy to report that the women committee still exists up to date. We've also been called to do research in Kigali, Rwanda. We started looking at gender and electric mobility. There's been a lot of focus on moving to cleaner fuels, and especially in public transport, looking at electric vehicles and electric public transport. And so we did one research looking at leveraging gender to increase the uptake of electric mobility. Based on that research, we worked with social enterprises who are now spearheading the work in electric mobility. And we helped them develop a model on how to increase women's training outcomes and employability in the sector. So based on this, we worked with social enterprise in Kigali called Ampersand. They've just scaled to Nairobi, but Ampersand introduced about a training program for women to become motorcycle taxis drivers, which in Kenya we call boda bodas. And so the training is still ongoing for 6 months. But they're using the model that we, FLONE Initiative and UN Habitat developed.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. I can see you have so many moving pieces in this. And then looking at the transport industry, I'm like, wow. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the successes you can talk about, speak to now, especially what is totally different about your work and how you have engaged the whole transport industry in Kenya, so that others can learn?
Okay. I think being an informal industry, and most countries on the African continent have an informal public transport industry, it's important to conduct research to document what's happening in public transport. One of the things I find fascinating about the industry is how nothing is written, but there is very organized system. And if you're not careful, you will make assumptions about the industry. One of them being that you'll see a lot of newspapers, for example, in Kenya saying the matatu industry is chaotic. It is really not chaotic. It is very, very organized. But you only find that out when you start looking into it, right? I think it's a very misunderstood industry with a lot of players that, again, are informal. So people sort of underestimate it. So I would say first is generate knowledge and data. Then after that, implement the research recommendations. We unfortunately have a habit of having very good research, but it's gathering dust somewhere. So even when we partner with academic institutions, we'll tell them we have to be able to implement what you recommend. So for example, we are conducting a research on women cycling in Nairobi. The past national government invested a lot in walking and cycling infrastructure in the Nairobi Central Business District. But when you look at the cycling trends, they haven't improved despite the increased infrastructure. So we wanted to find out why. And we found out that there is not enough awareness creation of this cycling infrastructure, but also this cycling infrastructure are not continuous. So you will cycle for a few minutes, and then after that, you're left, fighting for the road with other motorized vehicles. And so based on this, we are going to be implementing 3 of the research recommendations, one of them being training cyclist facilitators on gender considerations to make when they're conducting their training. Another thing is building a movement. I think we try and move away from the silo approach of working, where we bring on board 3 main stakeholders. We have practitioners, the commuters, and government officials. And we try and support these 3 target audience to implement inclusive mobility interventions in their own workplace or in their own work. I think we should shy away from thinking that we can solve the entire issue. And I think by working with, by building a movement, you're able to accelerate the change. I think yes, and lastly, I would like to talk about the need for behavior change, because some of the issues we are dealing with in public transport are also due to culture and socialization. And this unfortunately takes a bit of more time, but I think it's very crucial to invest in behavior change. You might invest in system change, but what will happen is that if nobody is looking, people still go back and commit the crime. And we need to get to a point when we empower people to self-regulate. And you can do this through public awareness campaigns, having champions, and the champions can even be from religious groups, cultural leaders, and having capacity building initiative, and especially in informal transport where there's no formal training.
Wow. So Naomi, honestly, this leads me to my next question, because I can see a lot of gender pieces in what you're doing, and then looking at building a movement, especially with what you just said about behavioral change. So what you and your organization you are doing is that you are getting people to see differently. And as they see differently, they begin to behave differently, which is wonderful. So what I would like to know, how are women, women, are they playing a role in the transport industry in shaping it to what it is?
Yes. Although unfortunately, according to data, again, women professionals only make about 7% of the public transport workforce. And so we developed the Women in Transport program, which aims to do 3 things, which is attract, retain, and advance women professionals in the industry. And we also provide professional development trainings, which include, for example, public transport vehicle driving courses, conductor courses, financial management courses. So for example, the financial management courses has led the women to establish 6 stable banking groups, which are savings and credit facilities, and they have a revolving fund. So they can get the financial muscles to actually move not just from being professionals to being investors in public transport industry. But we need to do more. And especially now with a new, allow me to call it the new mode of transport, which is electric mobility, you'll find that there are also not a lot of women in the industry. And so we need to invest more in not just looking at women as commuters, but women as professionals throughout the value chain. Can they be manufacturers? Can they be assemblers? Can they be designers? Can they be engineers? So just looking at the whole value chain of whatever mode of transport you're looking at.
Okay, that's good. So we can see different levels where women can engage and contribute to the growth of the transport industry. Now, looking back with what you have done both in research and other organizations, what does the institution, how are you institutionalizing the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that is very important to look at sustainability of your project. And I think as a founder, one of the things I've had to really look at is how do you sustain, how does the organization and the work you're doing outlive you and even get to a point when you're no longer associated with it. And one of the things we've done is we have women in transport chapters, and these are independent chapters. We have 3, one in Nairobi, another city, Mombasa, and a town, Machakos. And in these chapters, the women give a monthly fee in order for them to also be financially sustainable. And we also have elected officials who now run the chapters. The idea is that we would like to get a scalable model where the women in transport chapters can be replicated, whether or not FLONE is there. In addition, we've been working with government officials to build their capacity. So for example, one of the things we did last year was work with Machakos County officials, and they're the ones who conducted the safety audit of their town. And we created a toolbox with them, which was adopted by the ICLD, which is a Swedish agency. And our sustainability model, as you can tell right now, is putting the power and capacity building the women professionals, but also government. Because if you look at public transport is actually supposed to be a public good that's run by government, right? And so we are hoping by capacity building that we'll get to a point that public transport is formalized and run by the government.
Okay, all right. Just to remind everyone, please drop your questions while we continue and we'll get back to you. So Naomi, what's exciting you about the future when you look at the transport industry and your work and FLONE Initiative? What's exciting you?
I think what is exciting is that I see a future where public transport can be the preferred mode of transport and workplace for Kenyans. And I have seen it work in my own life and also my family, and I hope it will be a reality for millions of Kenyans. I also draw inspiration from leaders who came before us, who worked effortlessly or relentlessly towards some of the freedoms we enjoy. So, for example, one of the things I keep thinking about is back in the 90s in Kenya, women could not open a bank account without approval from either their husband or their family. And when I say that, when somebody told me that, I was like, that's ridiculous. Why do you need, somebody approval to open a bank account? And I hope in future that commuters can look back and say, hey, there was a time that public transport was not the preferred mode of transport, and there was all these negative experiences associated with public transport, and it would look like this ridiculous myth and notion, right? And so I look forward to that. I'm also inspired that that future will come within my lifetime, and maybe I could retire from FLONE. I've always wanted to be an artist. I'm not sure I'd make a good artist, but I hope I will get to find out.
Yeah. And in the artists, which area of the art are you interested in?
I really like theater.
Okay.
And so I hope to see if I can make a career in theater.
Transport theater, wow. That's a huge move. All right, I have one question from you from the chat. It says, as more women enter the transportation industry, what changes have you noticed? Anything surprising in particular?
Yes. I think one of the things has been how comfortable other vulnerable groups are when women are in those positions. So you will see that one of the things we found out according to our research is that people with disability will tend to prefer vehicles that are run by a woman conductor. So they say that women will tend to take better care of their accessibility aids, and accessibility aids is like the white cane, the wheelchair, the walking stick. Also that other women are more likely to trust the women professionals with their kids, especially school-going kids, that they will even have personal connections with women professionals in the industry, that they say, hey, my child uses this route, can they be using your vehicle to move from point A to B? So you'll find kids actually waiting for a particular bus to take them maybe from home to school or school from home. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Naomi. It's been so great learning and listening to your story. And I know that all of us, we are going back with a wealth of knowledge from what is happening in Kenya. And given that the public transport system is what we have all over the world, I'm sure people now have deeper insights and looking at how it affects, and that it's important for people to actually focus on building the institution in the public transport. Thank you. So thank you everyone for listening. We have come to the end of today's Wednesday's news series, and I'd like to let you know that you can check for the link later on today, the recording and highlights of this, so you browse and share, and of course, learn, and please join us next time. You know that Welcome Change is a weekly series, so please do join us. And thank you, and sign up and be there when we call. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and have a good night. Or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from.
Depending on where they are joining. Thank you, everyone.